Topic here is the 9/11 hijackers. We'll be using sources from the 9/11 Commission report, the book Perfect Soldiers, the Looming Tower, primary source documents like the last night, as well as Muhammad Atta's will. But for the most part, we'll be using excerpts from the 9/11 Commission report. So I started out with this particular number here, which is the amount of money that was used to implement and coordinate the 9/11 attacks. So when we look at the image here, we need to identify Muhammad Atta, Al-Shihi, Hani Hajor, and Zaid Jarrah. These individuals were part of what becomes known as the Hamburg cell, and Hani Hajor would come in late into the mix. Everybody else that's not one of the leaders are known as the muscle hijackers. So this particular slide here, using an excerpt from the 9/11 Commission report, we want to take note that this is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He was related to Ramzi Youssef, the guy who planned the 93 bombing of the Trade Center. Initially, their plan, which was just called the planes attack, involved the use of 10 planes hitting various targets here, and they wanted to execute all male passengers on board and then deliver a speech addressing Israel, the Philippines, and repressive governments in the Arab world. So that would have outlined their motive. When we're looking at Al-Qaeda, we have different individuals. Here we see bin Laden, who is usually known as the individual providing the money. Here we see Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the guy who planned the 9/11 attack. Al-Zahawi, which would be another individual, provided the soldiers, and those represent three of the few leaders of Al-Qaeda. So the first people are selected by bin Laden to conduct some sort of attack are these three individuals. Bin Attash, who was bin Laden's bodyguard at one particular point. And here we see Khalid Mintar as well as Hazmi, and it was already mentioned that these two individuals had lived in the United States prior to the 9/11 attacks, and they were not on the FBI radar. They were on the CIA radar for having attended a meeting and traveling back and forth, but the lack of sharing of information became problematic. All right, so how do we know any of this information wound up happening? As I said before, here we see from 1999, and this is coming from the Commission report. We see some travel, some, just travel arrangements that led to a situation where maybe this individual was a member of Al Qaeda and involved in some way with what would eventually happen. Karachi training. We also know that there was training that was received by many of the 9/11 hijackers. And again, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is telling them to watch the cabin doors on landing, taught the three operatives basic English words and phrases. Keep in mind, as I said before, bin Attash is not going to be one of the 9/11 hijackers. This individual would not make it into the United States. All right, so here we go. More of the travel arrangements. And again, like when you look at language like this, that's here, it seems that they are trying to figure out how, what are the procedures when you're on board these flights, and that information could later be used. All right, so here we have the next group, Ramzi al-Shib, another member of the Hamburg cell who wasn't mentioned before, primarily because Ramzi al-Shib is not allowed to get into the United States, which is why he is replaced by Hani Hajor, the pilot crashing into the Pentagon. Hamburg contingent. The Hamburg group shared the anti-U.S. fervor of the other candidates that operate, but added the enormous advantage of fluency in English. So for the most part, since the members of the Hamburg cell had spent time in Germany, they are a little more familiar with the Western ways in comparison to members of the muscle hijackers. And so as a result of their limited understanding of Western society and Germany, as they're spending time in Germany, they are the ones that are selected, and all of them would become, as it says here, key players in the 9/11 conspiracies. Here we see again Al-Shib talking about the Jewish conspiracy, and he felt that it was the duty of every Muslim to pursue jihad. So he comes into contact with Zaid Jarrah, because remember, we have this individual, Al-Shib, and he is in contact directly with Muhammad Atta as well as Al-Shihi, and then meets Zaid Jarrah, starts talking about these particular items, which appeals to him. And then before you know it, this guy is introduced to the people at the Al-Quds Mosque, where he meets the other members of the Hamburg cell. While they're at the Al-Quds Mosque, they come in contact with Mohammed Zamar, and Mohammed Zamar is an interesting individual because he had fought in the Soviet-Afghan War, and he's viewed as a leader, as many of the Soviet-Afghan War veterans were, and his interpretation of Islam starts to appeal to these individuals. As it says here, he's advocating for an offensive jihad, and the more you read about some of this, it just seems to be about chance. Um, the Hamburg cell members are trying to get to Chechnya so they could fight the jihad, but they are told by Khalid al-Masri, you're probably not going to get into Chechnya, why don't you go to Afghanistan? And they listen to this individual, and they wind up leaving, going to Afghanistan, where they meet bin Laden, and then, as I said before, these individuals are selected when it is determined that they have an understanding of Western ways. Don't remember exactly where that slide is at. All right, so back to Mintar and Hazmi. These individuals in January 2000, they are living in the United States, and as I said before, they attended a meeting. These individuals were also able to travel back to the United States, and they may or may not have received assistance from this individual, who is apparently a Saudi operative with links to some of these terrorist organizations, according to the commission report. And so this issue has been disputed, and it does come up as recent as the fall of 2020, I mean. And I guess some of this information is ongoing. When we go back to February of 2000, some of the information that was communicated to the Bush administration, that Americans will die within the next 4 years from a terrorist attack, is being asked whether or not Al-Qaeda is a threat, that they're not going to be able to stop Al-Qaeda attacks, and hundreds of Americans may lay dead, which is coming from Clark, advising the Bush administration about the ongoing Al-Qaeda threat. Here we see an image of Hani Hajor, Hazmi, and Mintar. Hani Hajor, another individual, is a licensed pilot, receives training, as many of these hijackers did, in the United States. Hani Hajor is an interesting individual because, according to the 9/11 Commission report, he arrives in Afghanistan, and that you have an application. I always, find that odd that you go to an Al-Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan and they give you an application, and they want to know these questions. And here they learn that this individual has a skill, and his skill is his ability to fly. Remember, they are kind of short a hijacker. And Hani Hajor seems to be an easy replacement. He spent time in the United States. He is a licensed pilot, so we send this individual in spring of 2000. So now we see the 9/11 hijackers, Mintar Hazmi, as well as Hani Hajor, in the United States. What year is that? Spring of 2000. By the summer of 2000, we see the other 9/11 hijackers, primarily the members of the Hamburg cell. And as I said before, Al-Shib not able to get into the country, which is why the application, results for bin Laden suggested Hani Hajor would be a good replacement for Al-Shib if Al-Shib cannot get into the country. Here we see the commission report. Between June 29 and September of 2000, Halisa and Sheehy and Atta, a total of 114 and 5 transfers. So the transfer of money eventually becomes a way to track money that's supporting terrorist activity. And that would be something that would be looked at post 9/11. This is a reference to the flight school instructor. And as it shows here, according to the instructor at Jones, the two were aggressive, rude, and fought with him time to take over controls during the flights. Who are we talking about? Muhammad Atta and al-Shihi. These individuals are receiving flight training, and they really seem to be belligerent. The muscle hijackers, as we mentioned before, they're going to primarily be from Saudi Arabia. Some information from the 9/11 Commission report about the 9/11 hijackers, mid to late 20s, about 5 feet, 5'7". Don't know if I put the reference here, but there was a reference in the 9/11 Commission report that looked at their weight, and a government official was questioning, like, how in the hell did this happen by a bunch of young 20-year-olds, 5'5", weighing about 140 pounds. I always find that to be interesting. We see Mintar returning on July 4th. So again, he's able to travel freely back and forth. He is able to get back into the United States from Saudi Arabia, and he becomes, one of the people involved in the 9/11 attacks. During the summer of 2000, you see a series of flights that are taking place by the main 9/11 hijackers, and here they're trying to just gather information. As it says here, they're taking surveillance flights. Those surveillance flights are designed to figure out what can you bring aboard the flight so they can figure out how they're going, what exactly are they going to do on the night of. This image is showing you the Hudson Corridor, which is this flight path here. Come to find out that the 9/11 hijackers were trying to persuade their flight instructors to allow them to be able to fly in this particular area, possibly as a dress rehearsal for what would ultimately, take place on 9/11. Muhammad Atta and al-Shib have their last meeting in Spain, and at this particular point, Al-Qaeda is trying to turn the attacks, trying to really speed them up. They want to get the attacks finished, and they're trying to put pressure on Muhammad Atta. And then eventually, you see the 9/11 attacks take place. And most of the last-minute details were determined by Muhammad Atta. For this particular slide here, I chose this one. That he even figured out planes. He compared Boeing to Airbus and concluded that Airbus has a safety feature to prevent automatic, crashing. And as a result of that, I guess we go with Boeing as opposed to the Airbus. August 7th, trip to Las Vegas. Third week of August, Muhammad Atta sends the message to al-Shib, 2 branches and a lollipop, and it's a reference to the 9/11 attack. I guess the lollipop representing the 9 and the 2 branches representing 11. So they know exactly when the date is going to take place in a coded message. 26,000 sent back to Al-Qaeda. September 8th, Jara, the guy who flies 93, will get a speeding ticket. And I have to point this out because for individuals that seem to be so concerned about purity and not committing sin, these individuals on 9/10 are trying to price prostitutes. It is apparent, according to the Pink Pony Nude Theater in Florida, that a Middle Eastern man left the Quran and said, "Tomorrow America will see bloodshed." I just don't get why people arguing that the U.S. is standing in the way of their ability to practice their religion in its purest form are engaging in sin. It seems to be contradictory. And of course, Jara writing his letter to Ansel. which is right here. And that's it.